Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Financial Realities and Navigating Shocks, our webinar about the Sri Lanka Financial Diaries. I see people joining the webinar. I'll just give people maybe one more minute, and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for joining today. Today we're going to be discussing our recent report on the Sri Lanka Financial Diaries, focusing on how diarists have coped with shocks in their lives. Now, before we get started, I just want to I know that there are some Japanese speakers joining today, and I have to apologize due to some technical difficulties. We're not able to offer automatic translation to Japanese today. So unfortunately, this webinar will only be in English. Okay, so to introduce the speakers, I'm Cheriel. I'm the head of impact at Gojo. And today we are joined by Rizanth Francis, who is the CEO of Sejaya Microcredit, our partner company in Sri Lanka. Haran, the director of Sparkwinn Research, which was our research partner on the Financial Diaries. And my colleague, Marceline Manoj, who is our researcher in residence and the author of our most recent report on the diaries. So this is our agenda for today. We'll have some presentations from each of the speakers, followed by a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions as you go along, please click the Q&A button and drop your questions into there. We'll try and answer them at the end. Now, just a quick introduction to Gojo. Gojo was founded in 2014 with the vision of creating a world where everyone can determine their own future. And our mission is to extend financial inclusion across the globe. We're based in Tokyo, and we are a holding company of banks and microfinance institutions that focus on financial inclusion for low to middle income people in developing countries, primarily in South and Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. Gojo's business model is to raise funds from like-minded investors and to channel them into our group companies, which are aligned with our mission. We identify and invest in financial service providers, which are aligned with Gojo's mission and which serve low to medium income people in developing countries, eventually taking a majority stake. At the same time, we also support our group companies to scale up and improve their services by negotiating debt funding, improving governance processes, implementing new technologies, and using data to learn about clients' outcomes and experiences. So with that quick introduction, I'm going to hand over first to Haran to give us some background on the livelihoods of people of the diarists in Sri Lanka.
Hi, Cheriel. Thank you for giving an introduction. So, to give a context about this financial diary project, okay, so this is like very exciting project for us because it's ran for about close to about 2.5 to 3 years. Like every day we are collecting their financial behaviors and recording in a diary and capturing that information, digitalizing that information, and process a lot of data at the back end. So one of the most important challenge I would highlight is like during this period, which we conducted between 2021 and 22, because like 21 to 23, one of the key challenges country is going through major economical issues. Okay, so one is particularly it is just after the post-pandemic economic recovery, where people have lost jobs and they are facing financial hardship and all, and they are just recovering from the post-pandemic COVID-related issues. And then one of the other major incidents that happened during this the period which the respondents were writing the diary is the economic crisis that happened in Sri Lanka. We were like witnessing how it has affected the diaries, and even like all of a sudden, like with the currency depreciation, where the currency the value of the Sri Lankan currency has weakened by the double the amount, like so it has weakened into a like position, so which has impacted the prices of goods and services, and everything was rising, right? Particularly the fuel and the fuel and the gas prices, etc., rising, which creating putting a constant pressure on the people. So that is one of the challenges, and we have gone through, we have seen how people were adapting and responding to these vulnerabilities during this period of time. But irrespective of all these challenges, people find a mechanism. So particularly this household, maybe we are looking at a kind of a bottom of the pyramid household, about 100 to 110 household, where most of them are really in the poverty level, and they were finding innovative ways to run their household. That some of them are depending on remittance, some of them are finding extra jobs, and some of them like working on like additional hours to fund their household finances. So that is like one of the best part, like irrespective of the challenges posed on to these vulnerable group of respondents, they also throughout the period they are finding finding innovative ways they could increase their incomes and respond to the crisis, particularly the crisis in terms of food security, fuel access, spending on the essentials. As we are capturing almost all the detail of their financial transaction, we can see how their spending is moving towards more essential items, compromising on other household spending. For example, they are focusing more on food-based expenses, and they are prioritizing children's education more, and they are crunching or squeezing their expenses on some other less essential requirement. And we can see all over those behavioral changes happening during that period. The good part of it is the three things. One is in terms of the macro challenges that was putting them or pushing them onto the corner. They were resilient in terms of adapting to increase their income in multiple ways, doing like finding innovative ways to get more money during this crisis period. Then also they are managing their expenses, and then we can see a lot of informal borrowings and informal credits and formal, even some of them are reaching out to formal institutions for credits and all, how they are coping to this vulnerable situation during this period. So the emerging reality is like one of the important highlight I want to mention. So these Sri Lanka, we are yet to see at the bottom level a lot of financial products and the banking, non-banking access to their access for their financial needs. Still a lot of central bank and a lot of other financial institutions are working towards it, but to a great extent we see a lot of barriers and challenges for them to access, and their internal the bottlenecks they have in place to access these financial products for in order to manage their household needs even during a crisis situation. And most of them, like we can see informal levels of borrowings and loans which they pay a lot of which they cost them a lot more than the formal financial institution. And one of the another common aspect that we noted among these household is like irrespective of the external challenges, like as I said, accessing the finance or like the external shocks that they faced time to time, their internal challenges are also significantly high. If you can see, like most of these households that we visited, and we have seen at least one or two members are they have the health issues, like either the heart diseases or kidney disease or some form of health issue, which some part of their income are diverted to. And also there are challenges in terms of continuing the children's education, and there are challenges whether they need to buy for to prioritize their children, or whether they have to go for some of the fees, and the trade-offs are taking an important stage in these households. They are at their level, they are making hard choices in terms of managing that, like what trade-off, like what kind of choices I have, and what is the financial situation I have. So based on that kind of limited resources, and with there are a lot of unmet needs, these trade-off scenarios also play a lot of context to adding context to this finding. So that's it from my end. But irrespective of all these challenges, we can see these household finding ways to respond to this that shocks and coming back strongly. And even like after this diary period, the particular period, like we can see there was flood coming in last year, and like they were like some of the areas of people who are part of this diary project have been affected. And now after 3-4 months of the disaster, now people started recovering from such disaster as well. So it's a part and parcel of the daily life at this bottom of the pyramid. So they could see how to respond in terms of these vulnerable situations. That's it from my end. I will pass now to Mercy to present her findings on from her report.
Yeah, thank you very much, Haran. Hello, I'm Merslin Manoj. Once again, I warmly welcome everyone who has joined today. Thanks, Haran, for touching up upon the country situation and also internal and external challenges the households face. So let me begin based on our data analysis and collection, what we found. Our Sri Lanka Financial Diaries, maybe if I would begin with, is one of the Gojo's flagship research projects to understand low-income livelihoods and financial behavior. So what I'm going to share today is basically the ground realities that emerged during our research, which we have published in this report. So we worked among semi-rural and rural low-income households. We collected quantitative data from 9 regions and qualitative field interviews and house visits from 3 regions. Roughly, we worked with around 100 households, and these were farmers, self-employed individuals, some were small business owners, tea plantation workers, and even fishermen as well. So Sparkwinn Research supported us with their enumerators in data collection, translations, and also in digitization processes, because the data came in local Sinhalese and Tamil languages. And Gojo has its own microfinance company in Sri Lanka, Sejaya Microcredit, and Mr. Rizanth is here today. So we have a growing clientele in Sri Lanka, yet these research participants are not our clients. Basically, because to have unbiased information during our research, we intentionally chose non-clients to understand the livelihood and financial behavior. Next. So for those who are new to this methodology, so let me share what exactly is financial diaries. It is designed to capture the household's daily cash flow. In simple terms, we can say it as a household's bookkeeping. But the important aspect of financial diaries is that data is recorded every day over an extended period of time. And the best part about financial diaries is that it is self-recorded by the household. And analyzing such data provides profound insights. It's not only just income and consumption, like some of the points that Haran also mentioned. It also reveals life events and how they impact the household, their stability, their investments, asset building, also how they use financial services like for savings, loans, and loan repayments. So the picture you see in the middle is the diary snapshot of one of our diarists. So they record cash inflows and cash outflows. And they also write short notes at times, such as like, my husband had a surgery, or we took a loan for 22% interest, or the loan was used for well construction. So these nuances are very valuable when we do the data analysis. So let's move on. Now, coming to the report, this report is written as a sequel to last year's report, which touched on general trends and patterns. And this report focuses especially on a very specific topic called household shocks and vulnerabilities. To give further context, which Haran mentioned, Sri Lanka went through a major economic crisis in 2022. The price of essential commodities like food and everyday household goods just doubled, and even fuel, we can say, even tripled. So later, IMF came in and they provided funds to restore and stabilize the economy. So focusing on this period from 2022 to mid-2025, this report examines the conditions households faced, especially in rural areas, the coping measures they used, and what led these families into a downward spiral. Not every household, but some of the households. So the report makes the case that resilience building and poverty prevention deserves equal emphasis, both from policymakers and financial institutions. So now let's dive into the data analysis results. Firstly, on household income. Households predominantly relied on informal labor in this segment of research participants. Very few had monthly salaries or a pension. 84% of the recorded gross income came from daily and weekly wages. So as you can imagine, irregular cash flows and liquidity crunch are very real in this segment. Another key aspect is that over 50% of the households were self-employed. They had income diversification. They had small businesses. They also owned farmland. These were like smallholder farmers. But the revenue from small business that was recorded was only 11%, and from agriculture, 3%, which were comparatively low when compared to the wage labor income. And the main reasons were seasonality and inflation that was going on in that period of time. And I also need to mention that the government aid given by Sri Lanka, the state-run poverty alleviation programs like Samruddhi and Aswesma Welfare, provided though a modest support, but it was a consistent support to some of the households. Plus, many households received foreign remittances and casual gifts. Those also played an important role in the household cash inflows. So overall, if I have to say, agriculture and small businesses helped the cash flow, but it did not have the scale to replace the informal wage labor entirely. Moving on to consumption, a weighted average of per person per day daily expenditures during the research period was calculated, and we benchmarked them with the World Bank's poverty lines to identify where these households are. More than 1/3 of the research participants, around 38%, were on less than $3 PPP. So then you can understand that these are the people that had high income fluctuation and exposure to food insecurity. The next segment, which is 57% of the households, they were between 3 to 8.3 PPP, which we address them as a struggling middle. Some defining characteristics I need to mention about this segment. They engaged in income diversification, number one. They built assets very incrementally. They also saved a little bit. And yet debt in accumulation is an integral part of these households. Though they are above the poverty line, they are very vulnerable to downward mobility, especially during periods of shocks and uncertainties. So they do engage in asset liquidation whenever they needed immediate cash flow. So let's move on. So to take one step further, not only looking into income and expenditure, we also digged into other financial realities, like what are the emergencies and crisis situations these households faced. So we discovered 5 major types of shocks among our research participants. Number 1, small business loss. During the economic crisis with hyperinflation, the cost of the raw materials went very high, and also supply chain disruptions happened. And individuals who ran small businesses could not sustain their businesses, and they moved into wage labor. For example, in the picture is one of our diarists. She, along with her husband, they were vehicle cushion makers, but they lost their contract and they started working in a micro enterprise for weekly wages, which came with a reduced income. And number 2, death of the primary income earner of the household. I would say this was one of the devastating shocks among our diarists, often marking the start of a rapid descent into instability. First of all, there is a loss of life. Then not only does the income stop abruptly, there is also a cultural influence. People conduct exorbitant funeral ceremonies supported by villages and relatives, and which had a great financial implication on the household. Then it is challenging for the women in these households to find suitable employment, especially when you move into rural and remote areas. Number 3, health shocks. Emergencies like surgeries, chronic illness like depression we found, and also caregiving resulted in high out-of-pocket expenditures. Households liquidated assets such as land, small gold jewelries, and even income-generating vehicles like three-wheelers. And when this is not sufficient, they also turn to high-interest private lender loans during a health shock. Number 4, migration scams. This was huge. I need to mention here, households view overseas migration as a promising pathway to higher wages and stability. So they do take massive debt or liquidate life savings for visa and travel costs. But fraudulent visa agents take this money and they abscond. And especially for the victims, it is unsurmountable debt and deep psychological trauma, leaving them in a more precarious condition than before. And number 5 was climate-related shocks. This is very well understood. The diaries revealed it is a recurring reality for tea plantation workers and smallholder tea farmers because we dealt with them more. Landslides and weather-driven income volatility were very common among the tea farmers. Otherwise, also Sri Lanka goes through monsoon and heavy rainfall. Recently, they had floods as well. So these are common climate-related disasters Sri Lanka goes through. So let's move on. Just to give you a case study to show the extent of impact of fraudulent agents, let me share this. So in the picture you see is one of our diarists. The household took a 400,000 loan from an institution to pay for their son's visa and travel costs. The agency arranged the travel to Russia, but after landing there, he found the visa was invalid. And the household took another informal loan of 300,000 to get their son back to Sri Lanka. Now the son works locally in a garment factory in Sri Lanka, completely giving his salary for loan repayments. Now we can imagine how it would be a 700,000 loan for a household on daily wages. They cannot foresee when the recovery would be. And this was one of the challenging interviews when we did our field visits as well. So let's move on. Now, to touch upon how did the families cope up during the shocks and economic crisis, we observed a range of coping measures, mostly entailed personal and financial sacrifices. And these were broadly classified as short-term and long-term measures. Short-term measures were immediate survival responses to manage liquidity and to stabilize the cash flow, but it entailed trade-offs such as increased debt and asset losses. On the other hand, the long-term measures were adaptations mainly aimed at generating income. So people diversified, took up seasonal jobs. Women who did not work moved into laborhood. migration, domestic migration and overseas migration. These were all people employed to mitigate income volatility. So to move on, I'd like to touch upon one specific aspect as one of the coping measures is financial access. Where did people go for funds during the crisis? And this is a chart that generally summarizes our findings. Savings withdrawal was the first line of defense. Around 53% of the households used savings, but these buffers were very, very thin. Once exhausted, households turned to informal borrowing with close relatives. That was one of their safety nets, I should say. When it is unavailable, then they turn to private lenders. Around 40% of the households used very high interest private lender loans, which actually made them more vulnerable. 23% of the households used gold loans. For those who don't know, gold loans are very common in Sri Lanka, offered by banks and other licensed financial institutions. Like these are very small gold jewelries. Households accumulate over the years when women come of age or when women get married, people get married. Also, people opted for gold loans because of quick cash disbursement and minimal documentation reasons. People also used Roskas, informal mechanisms, and also niche sources like workplace loans. So this was a general understanding from our analysis where people went for funds during crisis situations. So let's move. So beyond income volatility and the immediate impact of shocks, there were deep-seated structural issues also dictated households' choice of coping measures. Firstly, no legal documents. So there are households who had no land deeds, no house titles, even IDs. For example, in the picture is our diarist, and he lives in this house which is registered under his father's name. Now he has children and grandchildren. The fourth generation has come, but the documents are not being transferred. Some households don't even have utility documents. But these households are on daily wages, and the lack of documents, because of lack of documents, they cannot go to formal institutions and they cannot access credit from these formal institutions. So naturally, they rely on private lenders for funds. And this was very widespread practice that we found when we moved into remote and rural areas. The second aspect was young adults in daily labor. Older teenagers after secondary school education, by the age of 16 or 17, they start working to supplement household income. And especially when economic shocks occur, parents also prioritized immediate low-wage earnings over higher education. In this picture is one of our diarists. She and her husband are leather shoemakers. But during economic crisis, this household lost their business. And two of her oldest sons started working in a car shop after their secondary school. So you can imagine this early exit from education entrenches intergenerational poverty, trapping the next generation in the same cycle of low-skilled, low-wage labor. So another structural barrier that we saw was utility areas. Sri Lanka went through major utility tariff revisions. If we look at the electricity tariff alone, a 75% increase in 2022 came in, and then followed by a 66% increase in 2023, and some more came later on as well. And all these tariff documents and links we have provided from the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka, and we have attached those things into our report. But the main point is that these tariff increases have led to accumulated utility bills, and they have a huge impact on low-income households. So the households skip payments, or they make part payments, or even borrow to make these utility payments. And this also reveals the inability of these households to absorb the increases in cost of living. Another major structural barrier, let's move, is incomplete housing and lack of basic amenities, which were also drivers of vulnerability among the diarists. Families typically constructed their homes incrementally over several years. In the picture, you see a diarist. When we interviewed her, it was almost 3 years, but the house was like this. And this is mainly due to an ever overlapping condition due to documentation gaps. And so they go for informal loans, and they often have to repay one loan in full before becoming eligible for another. So they end up with stalled installments and unfinished construction, causing poor living standards. So these are some of the main structural barriers we observed among our diarists. So based on all these presented analysis and findings, we observe that vulnerability does not arise from any one single factor. Instead, it emerges at the intersection of income and consumption patterns, resource availability, structural barriers, and also the choice of coping measures when households encounter shocks. As a result, we found even when two households face identical shocks, their recovery outcomes and pathways are very different. While one household leverages buffers and social support, stabilizing within months, another household engages in asset depletion, high interest borrowing, and recovery spans years. Hence, a set of indicators were developed and compiled, such as savings and social support and utility areas, to identify low to high risk households, which policymakers, institutions, and also investors can look into to assess the vulnerability and to understand the segment in this region. So finally, let's move. To summarize some of the key findings that has been presented here, 84% of the income in this research participants, they relied on informal loans, informal wages, daily and weekly wages, and they were exposed to income volatility. And unless diversified through small businesses, agriculture, and remittances, they could not manage their cash flow. Another one was 57% of the households, they were between $3 to $8 PPP. Though above the poverty line, they remained vulnerable due to liquidity constraints and debt cycles. Next, unexpected shocks created a dual crisis, sudden income loss, and also coupled with immediate spikes in expenses deeply affected the households. Not only the financial well-being, but also psychological well-being of the household. Another aspect is coping measures. Short-term coping measures like asset liquidation harmed their future earning potential. We also observed dietary cuts, consumption cuts. On the other hand, long-term coping measures like adaptations, gender shift in labor, migration, family members taking up multiple seasonal jobs, all these helped cash flow. Next is financial access. We did see heavy reliance on informal credit in times of crisis and emergencies. About 40% of the household relied on relatives, and also another 40% relied on private lenders as well. So 23% of the households relied on gold loans. Gold loans was a lifesaver during specific crises. Yet some households used Roskas, informal mechanisms like Roskas to support in times of emergencies. Then we did observe systemic deficits like lack of documentation, where people lacked house deeds, land deeds, and it excluded them from institutional support. At the same time, older teenagers and young adults in low-wage daily labor, also we found entrenched vulnerability in these households. So in closing, I would say a central finding to this study is that household vulnerability is highly dynamic. There were compounding effects of economy, structural conditions, and also shocks, and they do have a tendency to push these households into downward mobility and some into destitution as well. So pathways must arise both from policymakers and financial institutions to build proactively resilience, especially when we go into rural communities. So this is a very concise presentation, but the report covers more details. and it is interlaid with evidence through diary stories as well. So I invite you to take a look at this report. Now, with this, I would hand over to Mr. Rizanth, the CEO of Sejaya Microcredit, for his views.
Hi, I'm Rizanth Francis. I think I'm representing Sejaya Microcredit, which is fully owned subsidiary of Gojo. And we have been serving in Sri Lanka market over 10 years now with over 100,000 clients with 16 million worth of dollar worth of portfolio. I think when you look at the survey and finding, it's a exact representation of what's happening in Sri Lanka. I think Sri Lanka has been going through a couple of blows starting from 2017, and either it is man-made disaster or natural disaster. So every time we have seen as a company, I think communities in Sri Lanka, they are very good in resilience. They want to bounce back and cope up with all the resilience. But though they are very strong in resilience, on the other side, we have seen that certain times, I think they have to sacrifice something to become resilient, resilience and cope up with the shocks. So we mainly, as a microfinance company, what can we do in order to help this segment or this client? So we have identified a couple of key areas where we can help this community and make them more resilient than what they are right now. Especially, I think the recent past, we have experienced a cyclone. We call it Ditwa cyclone. So we realize many people lost their lives and their belongings, and especially a lot of houses were washed out. So there is a need emerged in the community where the companies can help the societies to this segment to come up with some housing insurance or maybe life insurance. As a microfinance provider, we provide insurance, that is a credit life insurance, but there is a opening for us right now to think beyond the credit life, to make them more strong in resilience by providing them business insurance or maybe health insurance, hospitalization insurance, and life insurance as well. More than the credit life, their life also. And so these are some of the openings which has been now emerged from the recent development. So as a company, we are in discussion with many companies to come up with some insurance scheme to make them more resilient. And currently also we do savings. We call it collateral savings, compulsory for them to do savings. So we are inculcating a savings habit among our customers of this segment, where when there is a shock, they can also utilize the savings that they are with us. So these are some of the areas which we do right now. And we have in the recent past, we have seen because of this economic shock, we also seen there are dropouts from schools as well. After secondary education, there will drop out from schools, because if you listen to Mercy carefully, you would have listened that a new young generation moving from school to employment. So we can do a lot of skill development programs to make sure though they come out of school. We can also do vocational training and skill development trainings for them. And in fact, we have done a couple of training with the help of some big corporates in Sri Lanka. So this can be continued. And also, when it comes to a migration scam, I think that's one of the biggest scam that is happening in Sri Lanka. People want to migrate, but they get into scammers and they got looted by these individuals. So I think as a country is doing a lot on illegal migration, but we also can organize some pre-migration counseling for our communities to make sure that they don't go and get into trap with these fraudulent agents. So structurally, I think we don't have any structural barriers. I think we support everybody, every clients, whether they have proper deeds or not. But in Sri Lanka, we believe that we also can work with some government firm mobile, government. So there are some services available in government. They go to the residences and make sure that they get their proper ID, land deed, things like that. So we can also work on that particular aspect as well. So these are some of the assistance that we can give to this segment, especially this vulnerable segment, to become more vigilant and to make sure that economy is not get disturbed these kind of financial and non-financial shocks. So I hand over to Cheriel to take this.
Okay, thank you so much, Rizanth, Mercy, and Haran. So now we have around 15 minutes for questions. And I see that some people have already started putting questions in the Q&A box. If you've got any questions, please do drop them in there. So to start us all off, one of the questions we received is, why can't vulnerable households get access to finance, though? For example, from cooperatives or Samurdhi banks that, at least in theory, should be targeting this population. Why do they rely on informal lending instead? And I think this is a great question for maybe all three of you.
Not me too.
Okay, I can begin by answering this. Yeah, so thank you for this question. Yes, we do have households who had accessed cooperatives and some households who have accessed Samurdhi banks for savings and also from certain extent of housing loans. That is definitely there. We covered that in detail in our last year's report from where all households took what kind of loans. But this report mainly focuses on crisis and shocks. And in those times, especially when they need a higher ticket loan, where did they go to? So that is what the main focus on. So that's where we focused on in this report. But yes, but as you have mentioned, cooperatives and Samurdhi banks, people had access loans, and we have covered that in our last year's report. But I would let others answer as well.
Yeah, when it comes to the ticket size, I think what the Samurdhi Bank offer may not suffice for the borrowers to meet their requirement. That is the main reason why they ignore Samurdhi and corporate banks and go for informal and other money lenders.
Thank you. Haran, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, so one of the, as correctly mentioned, so they have a kind of an internal mental barrier also. Like for example, their loan requirement are for a shorter period and for a particular reason, maybe attending a wedding or maybe a small shock in terms of paying educational requirement of the children, or maybe something related to a passing away some of the family members. So it is tied to a particular event and for a shorter duration. In that case, most of them still rely on the informal avenues, but gradually, with microfinance institutions working on, they are considering for a business purpose or a formal purpose, they're looking or considering the formal channel. But for the other regular ongoing short term, irregular, shock related events, they are looking the informal lending channels.
Thank you. And then a question that is a little bit related to that is, were the survey participants who are below the poverty line already receiving welfare benefit payments, or were they generally excluded by the criteria laid out for such receipts? Mercy?
Yeah, so let me answer this. Among our research participants, we did see roughly around 27 households were recipients of Samurdhi welfare benefits. But when the new welfare scheme came, that many got filtered out. For example, some people who had family members who had traveled outside. some who have moved to the cities. So when they had better income, many of those households got filtered out. So with the ASVESMA program, we had 9 participants from our research they were receiving, but they received consistent support throughout our research period.
Thank you. And did you find many instances of multiple borrowing among households?
Oh, yes, this is a big yes for this question. I would also say people will take multiple informal loans. They will take from one lender, I would pay to another one. Many households were in a debt cycle, or a vicious debt cycle, I should say, to balance when the thick economic crisis was going on. I also saw patterns like people taking from microfinance institutions and paying to informal lenders. So those patterns were also visible. Yes, this is a big yes for this question. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to ask Haran. Haran, when we first reached out to Sparkwinn for this project, I recall Sparkwinn was a relatively new organization, and it was your first time being involved in something in a high frequency panel survey like Financial Diaries. So how did you and your team find it doing Financial Diaries as a methodology for the first time? What was challenging, or what was most interesting
It
for
was
you?
interesting and a challenging project. Yeah, sorry. It was interesting, and as you correctly said, it's a challenging project as well. But what we want is we want to learn the method. I think you have like Gojo, and with the advisors on board, you have a wonderful methodology of capturing the required information and all the support in terms of guidance and what are the challenges, how to tackle those challenges came in from the advisors and Gojo. So basically, what we found it interesting is like we need to build a lot of trust among the respondents at the initial phase. Okay, but in Sri Lanka, where people would ask why you are recording this, why you are asking this information, why you want our income level. So a lot of initial stage, a lot of suspicious, and people were asking a lot of questions. So that the first part we were focusing on building trust among these respondents, why we are doing this and the background and the logistics behind this and all. So then as a second phase, gradually, little by little, we with the support of the Gojo team, we improve the quality in capturing like all the transaction. Early and in the first month and all, people are missing some utility payments and all. So but like we were trying to make them understand the project and why we were doing this, and making sure that all the information are captured. For that, like our enumerators are visiting too often to the respondent and making sure they capture all the information and like balancing to the dot. Okay, so even over the period of time, what is more interesting is so there are 9 locations we have done the survey, and there are about 9 to 10 enumerators involved in the process. They developed a good rapport with this respondent in when we started to within 3-4 months, and it's naturally become a bond that keeps them going. And even enumerators go delay by a day or two, the respondent used to call and ask, okay, I have written my diary, like why don't you come? And so those kind of bond and relationship came in, and we also Gojo team came down from Jaffna, and we also visited the field to understand more context of your spending and all. So that it is a kind of in Sri Lankan context, it is the trust and the connection that we build made us this project successful and capture the much required information. I would say both the methodology is innovative, and also the approach that we took with the different set of stakeholders helped us to gain the required rich data.
Thank you. Yeah, and as you were speaking, I was just remembering that there was one example of a diarist who her husband very sadly passed away from complications from diabetes. And when he had his health crisis, it was the enumerator in the area who actually took him to the hospital that day. not because she was the enumerator, not because it was her job, but because she was simply their neighbor. And I thought that was a really special example of how the enumerators built community and trust with the diarists. So yeah, thank you. And we've got one more question in the Q&A box. Based on the financial diaries, what do most households spend the majority of their income on? And Mercy, maybe it's interesting if you can kind of look at it from a discretionary spending and non-discretionary spending perspective. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to begin by sharing something, Cheriel, and then maybe I can pitch in, or?
Sure. Well, I think, and the reason why I suggested discretionary and non-discretionary is because I think a large, very big part of the household spending was non-discretionary. So they would spend on things like food. At one point, they were spending over 50% of their incomes, even up to 70% of their incomes on food. So for me, that's the very obvious answer. But I think maybe the more kind of interesting choices come when they have some money left over for discretionary spending. So, Mercy, I'd like to hear your observations there.
Yeah. So you were spot on in saying that the food was the major expenditure that came in during our analysis. And another reason is because of the economic crisis, high inflation, and the prices of commodities went very high. Yeah, apart from that, we did see people engage in smaller asset building activities. Like we did see many households engage in small incremental buildings. Like somebody is always building, a house is being built, an extra room is being built, roofs and floors. We always saw some kind of building assets into their spending patterns. Another major spending that we observed was fuel, transport and fuel. That is also because of economic crisis, I would say. And during the shock period, most of the expenses went on loan repayments. So loan repayments was another third important category of spending that went in when we did our analysis. These are top three categories that I would say.
Thank you. And now my next question is for Rizanth. So Rizanth, you mentioned introducing a wider variety of insurance products for clients. And I remember that when we were collecting the financial diary data, we made all these observations about how badly households were being affected by health shocks and how they always seemed to take the households by surprise, yet they were widespread among the whole diarist group. And I remember at the time we had an advisory panel of some researchers who had done a lot of financial diaries before. And I mentioned this idea to them about, wouldn't it be great if affordable insurance was more widely available for this segment? They could be protected. The kids wouldn't have to stop going to school to earn money for the family. And they kind of said, the response was kind of like, they kind of said that insurance really isn't popular among this segment because a lot of people don't trust it. So the demand is very low. And I was wondering what you see as the challenges for introducing insurance for this segment in Sri Lanka, and how do you plan to address those at Sejaya?
Yeah, so one of the challenges that we would definitely face is the premium. What is the premium that the client will have to pay? So whether they can afford this premium. So that is where we are playing a mediation role between the service provider and between client. So we will make sure that this insurance premium are very much affordable and one-off payment, not a regular payment or maybe throughout the year or whatever. So premium would be one of the challenge, and claiming the insurance is another challenge. That is why a lot of individuals, they do not want to involve in insurance because the claim process is very cumbersome. That is one of the challenge that we will face. And so we are trying to bundle a insurance project where it should be very simple and very straightforward when it comes to claiming the insurance, and very clear-cut policies and very clear-cut instructions will be given to clients as well as the insurance service provider. To say it's not popular because Sri Lanka medical is completely free unless you want to go for some special treatment. Of course, you need to pay. Like education is also from kindergarten to university level, it's free. So that is why people, they don't believe in insurance because the system is available, but not now that's not the case, because now everything you have to depend for. If you want a good service and better improved service, you need to go for a move out of government services. So these are two challenges which we foresee, and we also working with insurance firm to keep the policy very simple and premium is very much affordable for our clients.
Thank you. It'll be really interesting to see how that develops. Okay, so we only have 4 minutes left in the webinar, so we're going to move to wrapping up now. Thank you everyone who shared questions with us. This Financial Diaries project that we presented on today is just one of several Financial Diaries projects that Gojo has done. If I could have the next slide, please. We have managed 3 Financial Diaries projects in Cambodia, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, all with very different approaches and methodologies. And we publish regular content on Financial Diaries, including diary stories, reports, and so on. And we're constantly working on improving the website and adding more data and more content to it. So you can see on this page, there's a QR code and several links to the pages on our website. So please do check it out and explore our reports. At the same time, next slide, please. Because over the years, we've built up a certain amount of experience in Financial Diaries, and we are passionate about the Financial Diaries methodology and what we as an investor and what financial institutions can learn from it. We've decided to start offering consulting services around this. So we are accepting consulting inquiries about impact measurement, about Financial Diaries, about social and environmental performance management in financial inclusion. So if you're interested, you can email me. My email is on the slide. And finally, thank you so much for joining us in this webinar today and for your questions. Once you leave this webinar, there will be a survey form sent to you, and we'd really appreciate it if you would fill that in with your honest feedback. Thank you very much for joining.